can use the scroll wheel to move it side to side, or you can hold down the middle mouse button and move it around. The same goes for headers if you've got a long amount of items. So first we have the logic buttons. Now this one here, which looks like a little purple Pac-Man, you have the Blender game engine. Now it's pretty straightforward if you want to do a simple game. If you want to do a more in-depth game, this isn't going to be necessary because you've got to do Python coding, which right now I'm working on myself. But this is also about logic. I believe it's called Blender physics. You can make your own dominoes, like you line up dominoes and they can be knocked over and go in a chain reaction, which is pretty interesting. You can use balls and have a domino knock it into another domino. If you have a look in my videos, I've actually created one myself not long ago. It was just a little tester I was doing with lights and the dominoes. But it's all about, you'll often find yourself going into actor, dynamic, rigid body, no sleeping. But I won't go into it all really. You can go into bounds, and when you're, say, using a cylinder, you set that to cylinder and it will move like a cylinder should. If you've got it selected on box, the cylinder won't move properly. Here you add a sensor, you add a controller and a actuator. This is what you use to move the object in the correct direction you want to. This has multiple uses, but I tend to use keyboard. And what you do with keyboard is you just tap in the button you want to use to move the thing in the right direction. This you won't find yourself using very often. So you'll also find that you have to connect this ball to this other circular thing which looks more like a polo. But I won't go into all that. To put these up a bit, you click on these, but I'm getting a bit carried away with this. This is the scripting, the scripts window. This I don't tend to use neither, so I haven't got much to say for it really. But if you have a look in the book, it gives you enough information about it. This button you'll find you use pretty often. Now I'm going to hit Control and up for this. The idea of this button, for example, is I've got my cube selected. Let's get a better angle on that. And you do certain stuff like click here. Well, to start with, you've got these buttons. If you're colouring a flat shape, a plane, then you just use that one, or you can just use it in general. If you're doing a sphere, then you use that one. If you're using a cube, then you use that one. If you're doing hair particles, which isn't necessary at the moment, then you use this one. And this one's just for other different things like transparency and stuff like that, I think. But we are colouring a cube, so we will click on the cube. In here is where you type in what you want to call the texture, the colour. So I will call it cube. Now that is set as cube, but that isn't necessary unless you're going to be joining the texture to different things which you'll work out as you go through. All this is involving special things like transparencies, and you've got the ray mirrors and ray transparency, but that isn't going to be mentioned. What I am going to mention is this here. You select this bright grey box and move this up and down, say I want my box that colour, and it will turn into that colour. If I click here and say yellow, yellowish, now what often happens, I think it depends on the lighting, but what often happens is you move the view around and you get a yellow tint to the box, or whatever shape it is. I think it all depends on the shape as well, but yes, that's pretty much about that. You've got these buttons here, which I won't really take you into. You use one of them for, can't remember what it's called now, but you have a black and white image, and where it's black the plane will be at one level, and if it's white I think it's higher if it's white. So you can basically build mountains and landscapes using black and white pictures of clouds and what have you. It's pretty interesting. It comes in later in the guide. This is the object button. This one you'll find you tend to use quite a lot. Well, I do anyway. So you've got multiple things here. You've got the layers, which say this is a layer and I've got the box in it. This is a layer and I hit spacebar, add mesh, and let's say I do a isosphere, and there's the sphere, and it works in layers. I think I've just done something completely wrong, but it's quite useful. You've got the edit mode, which I'll hit space, add mesh, and I'll put the cube back. In the edit button, you've got add modifier, which I use a lot, using mirror and subsurf. The mirror, if you have an object here, you've got the cube selected and you have an object here, and then you want the cube to be mirrored to here, you basically use the mirror modifier and you select the object, which would be here, and well, you type it into a little box which asks you what you want to mirror it to, and you will get the box appear on the other side of that object, if you understand me. And whenever you move this object up, this one will. If you resize it, this one will do the same. And I tend to use that for photo references of faces and what have you. Auto smooth is quite useful when you've got a detailed model, and it just smooths it out for you. Don't always work, but it quite often does. I use this thing called Make Human sometimes, and the models come in all strange looking, and you hit auto smooth and it does a pretty good job of neatening it up. You've got center new and center. That's all about this little pink dot in the middle of your object. Sometimes the little pink dot's over there and your object's over there, so I tend to often end up clicking center new, and that pink dot will end up in the middle of the object selected. This is all about frames, that's involved in animations and stuff like that, and this is all about animation and taking a picture through the camera, rendering it's called, and it's all about the settings of rendering and the settings of animating. So you've got all these different buttons here, which once again I'm not going to go into in a hurry. So I think I'll complete this tutorial now with those details in mind. If there's another basics